Hi, Layla. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ella. Thanks so much for having me.
No worries. Layla, can you tell us a few words about yourself at the beginning?
Yeah, sure. So I know you've sort of done a little introduction to me, but I'm Layla. I run Diverse Minds, and we're all about creating positively productive, happy, equal, mentally healthy and equal workplaces through training, coaching, and consultancy. And my background is in higher education, working in race equity. My last job before starting my business was head of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Centre at Imperial College London.
Sounds great. So you work with organizations to help them ensure that their employees are mentally healthy and productive. Based on your experience, what are the most common issues that are related to mental health and diversity in the workplace?
Yeah, so I guess there are a few things, and I suppose one is that people don't often put mental well-being and diversity together. But we know that if you don't feel like you're an environment that values difference, however you want to define that difference, your mental health is probably going to struggle, and you're not going to feel great. I think as well, all the initiatives that work big, especially larger workplaces have. So considering like policies, basic policies you have to have, like parental leave or adoption leave, surrogacy leave, bereavement policies. They're great, but they're the bare minimum. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they are often shaped from one viewpoint and one lens, and having different perspectives is often missing. So I think that's another area. And I think the third area is that people just often don't see it as relevant. So you'll get people who are really keen and they are, wanting to do the training, wanting to be in the space. Other people who are maybe 50-50, they'll give it a go. And then the other sort of third of people who just think it's a load of nonsense. And I think getting those people on board, and that they can be from all areas in a business, is tricky because it's difficult to get those people on board, because if they really feel that way, how do you actually change, as the phrase goes, hearts and minds? How do you really enable people to see that this is a value if their standpoint is this is superfluous and nothing to do with my job?
So was diversity and inclusion always something you were passionate about? Where did the idea come from to specialize in that direction?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I suppose it's my sort of interest in this area, or my commitment to this area, has really been because my whole life I've been excluded from things. So from the playground, so like a lot of bullying at school, sort of bullying has been a bit of a theme running through my life. I've always been excluded. I've never really been included in things. So I suppose that is really where the main driver is, and to know how isolating and horrible that feeling is. And actually, I don't think it's necessary. I know there are probably people listening thinking, well, in terms of social dominance theories and social norm theories, there is a place to have in-groups and out-groups, but I think the damage that it does is so severe. So I think, and sort of lived experience of racism, and everyone's lived experience of racism is slightly different. So that's really, I think, what's driven me to this area. And I think, wanting to work with it and wanting to see changes.
Wow. First of all, I'm sorry to hear that. I have to say, I have never been a victim of bullying. That is a very difficult situation to be in, and one that impacts you for the rest of your life in terms of confidence, self-esteem, and many other things. So that is a massive reason. And well done you for transforming your life and getting into something you are so passionate about changing. Today we want to talk about identity. And what identity means to us, and what it is, and what impact it has on our life. Can you share your view on what our identity is? Because I think many of us are familiar with the word, but they never really have time to reflect, what does it actually mean to me?
Yeah, and it's a really big question, isn't it? And I think this kind of terms of identity politics has really come up. And I I don't know if I like that term. I think it goes back to this point about inclusion and exclusion and how people are feeling based on who they feel they are. So that could be things that we can see, like gender identity, skin color, hair color, because that's another one, height, and things that we can't see in terms of sexual orientation or someone's neurodivergent characteristics. So identity is very, very complex. There's lots of different definitions about it, but I think it is about how we view ourselves, how we view the things that the law appreciates, how the things that also identity can change. It's a bit like culture. Some bits of us are static, some bits of us aren't. It also depends, identity, doesn't it, on our relationships, where we live, where we grew up, how we grew up, sort of trauma that's
the
happened
society
to us
around us, the community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the different aspects of ourselves that are developed, and how we might get into a particular music style, and that will really shape as a teenager, and that will really shape our identity. It could be about religion, it could be around like I said, maybe something traumatic happened and that reshapes our moral compass. It could be that we might all know people that grew up quite wealthy and then suddenly their family lost money, and that's going to impact on your identity and how you see yourself. So I think it's the aspects of yourself that you feel are really, really important to you, that you want to see reflected somehow. And I think it's very closely linked to values. And I think it's very closely linked to culture as well.
Yeah. And it's a very interesting topic, isn't it? So it's like we are combining, we're living our life with identity, each one slightly different, each one of us slightly different one. And to a certain degree, we have impact on that identity. And to certain degree, we don't. So this is where the narrative identity comes in. And what is it? Can you tell us what is narrative identity and what impact does it have on our mental well-being?
Yeah, so narrative identity is thought to be, linked to what I said, the things that we might feel are movable and immovable, the kind of ever-evolving story of ourselves, and how we make sense out of our lives in terms of, how do I identify? And sometimes we might think of it as, maybe we move somewhere new and suddenly we think, this doesn't really fit with me. I don't feel at home here. I don't feel right. And we might try and do things. We might try and integrate ourselves into this community or this area, and it just doesn't feel right. And psychologically, it is a field in psychology that investigates the values of stories and storytelling in giving meaning to individuals' experiences and shaping your memory of past events, understanding the present and projections of future events, and how this defines themselves and their lives. So that's the kind of psychological definition. And you do get narrative therapy as well, sort of based on this. And I think in terms of our mental well-being, we need to be able to tell our own story in a way that works for us. So whether that's, through an official talk or an event, but also just being able to share our story in informal ways, in a way that feels very genuine and freeing for us as individuals.
And that is that power of self-expression, right? Where you can define that as self-expression. I found personally that when I understood who I became when I became a mom, and I realized how my identity has changed, how the way I perceive myself and the world around me has changed. Only when I realized that, I then slowly started recovering from the overwhelm of motherhood and the harsh reality of what motherhood can be like. And that was like, for me, that was like the first steps towards my mental well-being and creating a new, somewhat new identity for myself, deciding who I want to be, which aspects of my identity, of my beliefs I'm happy with, and which aspects I'm not so happy with, and what I will not let define me. So it's super interesting what we are talking about. I personally find it very, very interesting topic because it's very connected, you could say, to our identity, the way we perceive ourselves, the way we talk about ourselves when others don't listen,
Mm.
So, and these are like the fundaments of our mental well-being. And the more positive we feel about ourselves, the stronger the confidence and the healthier their self-esteem. So I'm really glad we are talking about this today. I hope this will be helpful for our listeners. So what are the main factors that you would say really determine our identity?
So I suppose that, there are a few elements to it. It can be our personality. So it could be even whether we have an extrovert preference, an introvert preference, whether we, say it like it is, whether we are more diplomatic, for example. It could be, which groups we want to associate ourselves with. So first of all, how we define ourselves. Then we've got social identity, the groups that we want to identify with, how we want to be seen as well by others. And then there's, I guess, social categorization. And this is difficult to do, I think, nowadays, in a sense, because I guess there are lots of categories, but it could be political social categorization. It could be the way you look. It could be
where you live,
again, it's
perhaps
where you live, absolutely, whether you're a parent or not a parent. For me, I think, Ella, we talked about this briefly, didn't we? I'm not a parent, and that's kind of, again, like you were saying, finding your identity as a new mother in particular, and the journey you had to go through. And I think those of us who've chosen not to have children, when you're child free by choice, is obviously, again, different to those who have chosen, who haven't chosen not to have children. And I kind of think you have to fight back around how people categorize you when you don't have children, and they say, you'll change your mind, poor you're selfish, and all these things that happen, and how you feel you have to stick up for yourself as well.
Absolutely. But I really struggled with identifying with how people started perceiving me when I became a mom. I found like that's nothing like me. So even being referred to as a mom, I didn't identify with that. I found it very difficult to connect with other moms, and I'm quite open about it. I felt really lonely and isolated when I became a mom. I only then realized how extremely ambitious I am and how desperate I am to use my brain again, to put it quite bluntly. So I felt that the lack of those mature adult conversations about art and music and travel and work and dreams was really putting a massive shadow over my mental health when I became a mom. And I quickly realized that I can't talk about those topics in the playground with other moms. And of course, I'm generalizing now, or maybe I'm telling the story from my own perspective. But I hope that by opening and saying all this, I'm going to help someone else out there by making them feel like they're not the only one. Because there are other women who struggle with, like we know, with the shift of that identity, with becoming that new person and having huge amount of responsibility suddenly put on your shoulders, and you try to make sense out of like shifting priorities and all that. It's completely overwhelming for most women. And that identity is a big part that comes with the motherhood package, I find. So but this is why we're talking about this, so we can explore that topic. So as I said already, our identity changes when we become mothers. How do you think it really impacts us? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think some of it you've touched on, actually, about society's expectation. And I've got friends as well who've said they've had a baby and immediately people say to them, when are you having the next one? So this idea that you're almost a baby factory, and that this is what, they haven't even had time to go home and maybe take a shower and sit down and process what your body and your mind have been through. And people are asking you these questions, which is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I suppose it's as well maybe shifting. A lot of people are caregivers before their parents, in different ways.
Yeah.
But I guess being responsible for a tiny little breathing thing, and also to remember, I guess we're talking about biological motherhood. There's lots of different ways to be a mother or a parent, aren't there? So there's adoption, that might be through surrogacy, it might be fostering. So you might consider yourself a foster mother, a foster parent. You might be in a same-sex relationship, or your partner might be non-binary. So or you might be a single parent through choice or not through choice. So there's so much to it, isn't there? And I think it is this idea that you have to be this perfect whole person for your children. You can't have any flaws. The pressure's really on, and there's one kind of motherhood. So I think that this really does impact people, because it makes them feel that they're not good enough, they're not adequate. And they're funny, but they're also quite painful, aren't they? Those memes that you see on social media that show, I'm meant to do all these things. I'm meant to eat healthily, go out, go running, exercise, look after my kids, do this and do that, and get some sleep and look after myself, and it's just not possible. So I think it's almost, it can feel like a bit of a dumping ground, that you have to be everything to all people when you're a mother, and good luck if you need to be there for yourself.
I've spoken about this in one other podcast episode called The Myth of a Perfect Parent, where I discussed this with Dr. Andy Wiener, who says there is no such thing as a perfect mother. There is just good enough mother, and we have to accept it. And the sooner we accept it, the healthier we will become. So that's interesting, isn't it? Yet we tend to completely exhaust ourselves trying to live to others people's expectations. And I actually read in another book called Complete Guide to Stress Management by Dr. Chandra Patel that the worst mental health is in married women. Which the book was published over 10 years ago, but I wonder how much has changed since then, actually, which is interesting, isn't it? What about unconscious bias? So we know that our identity is often influenced by unconscious bias, and our self-image is more often than not based on the beliefs we have formed from our young age, in our childhood. What can you tell us about unconscious bias and its link with identity? How does that affect our identity?
Yeah, and I think one way to think about it is, again, I'm not a psychologist, but through the principle of schemas. So we have self schemas. What do we believe we're capable of? What do we believe we can do? What do we believe we can't do? So I think that really has a big part to play. So if you're told you can do anything or be anything from a young age, you're likely to believe that. And if you're told you're worthless and you won't amount to much, it's not that that will be the case, but it's almost like priming someone to not have very high expectations of themselves. So I think that has a huge part to play, and like you said, the what we see around us, and that women are often still told, even though we're out of the 1950s, that you should be a mother and a wife first. And I think we see that, don't we, with women's health research. So there is lots of resource, and I'm sure some people would challenge me on this, but generally speaking, lots of resource for IVF. Okay. So to become a mother, there is very little to no resource when it comes to menstrual health, when it comes to, it's like, oh, you can have a hysterectomy or you can carry on your life. And it's like, that's not really much of a choice. How is this area of medicine not progressed? When it comes to menopause journeys, when it comes to specific gynecological cancers, they're very underfunded, with the exception of breast cancer, but gynecological cancer is really underfunded. So it is interesting that that kind of idea of women, a mother and a wife first, and medically that's represented, and yet we have so many other conditions that impact fertility, or not even just fertility, someone's quality of life, and the percentage of research and dedication that goes into that is absolutely tiny compared with other conditions. So that kind of belief in the way it's threaded through, and I think it's very, very difficult. And I think therefore to say I do want to be a mother or I don't want to be a mother is challenging, and the kind of, well, what kind of mother do you want to be, or how come you don't want to be a mother, or how could you, that's not, someone said that's not natural to me. It's not natural to not want to be a mother. And in some
Oh
ways, I guess
gosh.
it isn't. In some ways, I guess it isn't. I mean, I don't agree with the way she said it, but if she'd said it to me in a different way, I think it would have had a very different flavor. But in some ways, I guess, speaking from my own opinion, it isn't, because we are meant to procreate as a species, aren't we? But yet, if we've evolved so much technologically, why is it still so difficult to have this conversation?
There's an incredible amount of social pressure behind this, I feel, from every angle. Our parents, our families, our friends getting married, having babies, and it's like this fear of missing out. Many people just have kids because of the fear of missing out, because it is a social norm to have kids. Yet you look around, how many, I'm sorry to say this, but how many really truly happy parents do you see? How many parents do you see that where a woman feels really fulfilled in a marriage and as a mother? How many relationships or marriages do you see, or partnerships, where woman feels supported by her partner and is encouraged to go back to work and is happy and has the sort of conditions at work and flexibility where she can thrive? I think it is absolutely enormous gap, in my opinion, between the social expectation of us becoming mothers and what help is available to us once we become a mother. Because the help that is available to us is practically zero. So it is so fundamental that we introduce this mental health awareness to how motherhood can change our identity, what can go wrong, and when it does, what can we do? And of course, it's not all black and white. There isn't always a simple solution for it. But I think slowly breaking that taboo topic is probably step one. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and yeah, I guess that, yeah, this whole idea that you have to be happy and it should be amazing and everything should be perfect. Yes, and I think, you know, people have said to me, in fact, a very dear friend who had twins, and she said, Layla, you did really well knowing that it wasn't for you, but I just didn't realize how hard it would be. No one tells you. And I thought,
No.
but they kind of do, but maybe they tell you when it's too late. And she said, I just saw everyone around me coping, so I thought I could cope. And I just have to say to myself that it's okay. I'm not going to get things perfect, and that's how I get through it. I'm not going to be this perfect parent. I'm going to be as good as I can be, and that's all I can do. And that's I think in most societies that's not seen as good enough, is it? And I think particularly in the West or the global North, there is a lot of isolation in motherhood, isn't there? And I think other communities and other, you know, in the global South and diaspora communities as well, there is potentially more collectivism around it. There is more, you know, that whole phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, because it really does, doesn't it? And you need those networks, but we're so distant from those networks now, partly because maybe we choose to move, we have to move, partly because people can't afford house prices maybe where they grew up. There's so much to it. There's that economic point that you just made, that it becomes really difficult, and it's hard in Britain. People don't really talk about money, so you know, to say, you're allowed to say I can't afford something, but to say actually I'm really, really struggling, and there's no way I can afford my childcare, so I'm going to have to give up my job openly like that, it's just not something that's done, is it?
Or imagine saying, actually, after having my first child, I discovered it's not for me. I don't enjoy being a mom, so I'm not going to have a second one. Imagine saying that to someone, especially another woman. It's very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people who will say that to me as a non-parent, but would they say it to someone who was a parent? I don't know.
It's very different, yeah. So is there anything, just to summarize this topic, is there anything in terms of our identity and us women that we can do to proactively protect our identity or change or shift certain aspects of our identity that we are not happy with?
Yeah, and I think maybe the first thing is for people to sort of unpick what their identity is, because often we don't take time to do that, do we? We kind of like, I am me, I am my name, and absolutely your name is totally part of your identity. But what does that really mean to you? So I think maybe it's thinking about what are the things that are totally immovable for you, that are really important. So your values, your non-negotiables, things that are really core to who you are. Then I think about the things that you like to associate with. So is it music? Is it people? Is it reading? Whatever it is. So some of it will be activities. Some of it might be lifestyle. So I don't know, if it's organic living or if it's kind of living in the moment or slow living, everything's got a name these days, whatever it is. And then there are attributes like your gender identity, your race, ethnicity and culture, where you grew up, which you can't really change, and how you want to integrate that into who you are. So I think it's those 3 layers. And then once you've explored that, you can think about, this has happened, my identity might need to shift, or what are the stories I'm telling myself about myself, or are there things that I'd like to share with other people that maybe they never would guess or they know about. So I think by doing that and really being able to explore that and feeling quite confident in that really helps our mental well-being, because we know our parameters and our boundaries, and also what we want to share and discuss with other people.
Yeah. And do you feel 100%, do you also feel that knowing your values and staying true to your values helps? Do you think this is something that is really that closely interlinked here with this topic?
I feel it is, because I feel like your values are your guiding light, and your sort of your identity is how you see yourself and how others might see you as well. So if you don't know them, or you've not taken time to do that, it might feel that your identity is a bit scrambled. And it doesn't mean that you don't have an identity if you don't do a values exercise, but you'll find that your values and identity are probably very closely aligned and in sync, which will help your well-being in terms of thinking about how you want to live your life, and what's going to bring you joy, what's going to make you feel well, what things you need to concentrate on your day-to-day to feel mentally optimum.
Yeah, great. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Layla. In case any of our listeners want to find out more about you, where is the best place to find you?
Yeah, brilliant. So I have a weekly podcast called the Diverse Minds Podcast. You can check that out on anywhere that you listen to your podcast from. My website, diverseminds.co.uk, and I'm on LinkedIn, my name, and also there's a Diverse Minds page, and my handle on Twitter and Facebook are at Diverse Minds UK.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to include all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time and exploring this important topic with us today.
Thank you so much, Ella. Really pleased to be here. It's an honor.
Thank you. Bye.